So what's my take on two-a-day training when stressors are low? Uh, I like two-a-day training. That being said, I'm not a fan of doing two-a-day training too often or all the time. But if you have like periods of times where you know that like you don't have a lot of stressors, then I think it's fine. Like as long as you keep your sessions a little bit on the shorter side, like 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And what I like to do is the lower reps, so higher intensities in the morning, and then you maintain the exact same muscle groups, and then you do lower intensities in the PM. You can even, like, if you really want to push hypertrophy, you can even do stuff like post exhaustion, trisets, even giant sets in the PM session. So the morning low reps, you could even add like some eccentric work, some isometric work if you wanted to, and then PM metabolic end type strength training. That works fine. I wouldn't go more than honestly 6 weeks straight. If you really want to push it, then you can take a phase where you go back down to 1 times a day. That would be my approach. So for a week chin up at the top, which exercise would I use? How would I program it? I mean, listen, to me, there's no better way to approach this than being specific to the lift of the chin up. So what I mean by that is you could use techniques that emphasizes the top. You could use 1 1/4 reps on top. You could use pauses on top. So I mean, just that will go a long way. Now, in terms of like muscles, like you could add a little bit more scap retractor work, a lot of rowing movements, bicep work, especially biceps. You could do like techniques like 1 1/4 on top, or even isometric pauses on top on an incline curl, for example. These are all little variants that could help with that top position of the chin up. How important it is to incorporate conditioning in a hypertrophy phase. Listen, at the end of the day, it's not crucial, but personally, I really like it because, for two reasons. One, like it's yet another anabolic window that you're adding to your training week, but that conditioning session will not interfere as much with the recovery of the strength training program than adding more strength training sessions. So it's one way to just add sessions and create that window where you're stimulating protein synthesis with your peri-workout nutrition without challenging the whole recovery spectrum too much. Now, second, one of the reasons why I like it is I also believe that in order to reach your potential in terms of hypertrophy, the more conditioned you are, the better able you are to push extreme methods of hypertrophy, like these giant sets and the trisets, to create even more volume. And also, indirectly, if that conditioning allows you to recover quicker from exercises, it also means that eventually you can increase frequency of training sessions, which will allow you, assuming you can recover, to push the hypertrophy barrier even more. So to me, it's one of these things where I just think they go hand in hand. And as long as the conditioning is not too extreme, the frequency is not too high, or the duration is not too long, I think it's a good tool to add for hypertrophy. Do I use hip thrust in my practice? I do not. And the reason is, like, the hip thrust, it's kind of in the big scheme of things, it's a relatively new movement in terms of popularity. And to be honest, like in my career, I've never used it. It's not something that I've used. So to me at this point, I just don't feel the need to use it with my athletes in terms of reaching my goals in terms of sports performance. Now, that being said, if I were to train like physique competitors, then I don't think there's anything wrong with doing the hip thrust to work on the glutes. I mean, like you're isolating it. You use it as a isolation type movement pattern. The only thing I would say is if I were to use it with physique competitors, I would make sure that I use it with loads high enough to recruit fast twitch fibers, because the gluteus max tends to be a little bit more fast twitch. So for me, people who do a hip thrust with light weight for like 30 reps, I just don't think they're getting the best potential outcome from the movement. So I'd rather do it with heavier loads for less reps to really fire the right motor units within that muscle structure. So how do you progress in volume for German body comp program through multiple phases? The thing is, there's a limit to how much volume you can generate in a training session. Assuming you're training for 60 minutes, there's going to be a point where you just cannot drive more volume because the work to rest ratio will become like unsustainable. So the thing is, you want to start on the lower end of the volume spectrum, and you build slow progression in total time and retention through multiple phases. But as soon as you reach the maximum threshold, then obviously you can't build more volume. So what you need to do is you need to go back down, all the way down, and then you rebuild it back up. But the difference is now the complexity of the German body composition training session should be higher. One simple way to look at it, so let's say that your GBC1 at, let's say, 1,800 seconds of total time under tension, add out of 8 exercise, add, let's say, 4 multi-joint movements and 4 single joint movement. Now what you can do is the second time you go back to 1,800 of time under tension, now instead you have 5 or maybe 6 multi-joint movement and only 2 or 3 isolation movement. So this, by default, increases the difficulty level of the training session. Now, although the volume is back down, at least you're creating more stimulus or a greater, maybe an energy expenditure because of the strain and the struggle, if you want, of the multi-joint movement compared to a single joint movement. And by single joint, you can also imply machines. So that's one way. You just have to understand that in the long run, there's a limit to how much you can manipulate the volume in a linear fashion. You just cannot keep going up and up and up and up indefinitely. Okay, so you basically you undulate it in a way. You progress, back down, reprogress, back down, reprogress. But every time you're going back down and up, just make sure that you add a difficulty level to the training program. Thoughts on tension trainers that say that all that matters is load on the muscle and not the load on the bar. Well, I mean, in theory, this is true, but personally, I think that approach, I call them squeezers, like people who just do like mostly isolation, slow control, poor leverage type of movement to create tension in the muscle. It's fine, like you can definitely do this, but to me, I think they're missing on the strength and the load element of the equation. Now you have to understand that, referring back to the episode of like 2 days ago or something, I was talking about load being the most important factor for advanced training for hypertrophy. Well, by load, I also meant tension. Okay, like they're both interrelated. So in a way, at one point, if you're doing a movement, assuming you have proper technique and you can feel all the muscle during that movement, well, more load will create more tension. So it's just not your will to squeeze and create tension that can generate tension. The load will as well. Now, again, it's fine. It's fine if you just do that training, but I just think you're missing a big component. You're missing the strain of heavy weights to the central nervous system, the strain of the heavy weights to adaptation in the tendons and ligaments, and the intermuscular coordination that those big movements will provide. So I just think you need to use both. That's why, like, if you look at my hypertrophy programs, I have accumulation phases that have more isolation work, more total time under tension. I have intensification phases where it's more bigger compound movements. I think that the combination of both over time leads to better physique. And even like from empirical evidence, I mean, how many high level or like huge, well hypertrophied trainees do you see that only do like isolation, squeezer work? It just doesn't really happen. Most of these guys build their base lifting heavy weights. You look at Ronnie Coleman, he started as a power lifter. Arnold started powerlifting. So I feel like you can build a good base and build strength and a big, hard, thick physique with heavy weights. And once you have a base, now you can use the squeezer work to a greater extent to one, deload the joints that have been stressed so much. Like once you're like when you reach the point where you're squatting 600 pounds, at that point it's so much strain and stress that it might be better to revert to simpler, more isolation type movements. There's nothing wrong, but they've built their base. So the only thing that like frustrates me sometimes as a strength coach, and keep in mind I come from the strength coaching background, but it's seeing a 160 pound 18-year-old that's only doing tension type reps all the time in their training, not focusing on trying to get stronger. I think that these guys are very limiting their potential for growth. Okay, so that's my take on it. I just think both needs to be done, but to me, emphasis on getting stronger is a big factor. What should a anaerobic alactic power session look like on a bike? So the anaerobic alactic, first of all, like we need to understand that it's very short, high intensity burst at 97% plus. The duration of the rep or the work interval should fall between 1 to 10 seconds. So technically on a bike, a 5-second all the way up to 10-second interval would work well. The work to rest ratio, now in sports performance, there's like neurological work to rest ratios and there's physiological work to rest ratios. And with tasks that are very complex or very neurally demanding, or where the G forces are high, like sprinting, for example, then you're better off using a neurological work to rest ratio, where for alactic power, we're talking about 1 to 20, 1 to 30. But on a bike, it's much more like simplistic in nature. For this, I feel that a physiological work to rest ratio is more efficient. Now we're talking about a 1 to 6 work to rest ratio. So let's say you're on your bike and you're going all out, full blown intensity for a 5-second burst, then the rest interval should be 30 seconds. So 1 to 6 work to rest ratio. Now in terms of sets and reps, the parameters, your reps would be between 4 to 8. And then the sets, 3 to 4 sets with 5-minute break in between sets. So how it would look like is you start like set number 1, you do, let's say, 6 reps, you do 5 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 seconds, 30 seconds. Do that 6 times. So that's 1 set. Then you take 5-minute break of an active recovery. You can stay on the bike, just slow and steady. Then set number 2, same thing. 5 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 seconds, 30, and you can do like 3 to 4 sets like this. So this would be a typical training session doing the anaerobic alactic power.